Okay, folks, Boland's The Pomegranate. What a poem. When you're writing about it, think about it in conjunction with the poem Love. So Love is about Boland's life. It's a deeply personal poem. So is The Pomegranate. Love is about Boland's personal relationship with a member of her family. So is The Pomegranate. Love is about her husband. This is about her relationship with her teenage daughter, her daughter. It's a poem which I would always, when I'm writing about it, when you're writing about it, I'd always bring in this moment. This moment is that wonderful celebration of love, you know, a parent's love for their child. Apples sweetening in the dark and, you know, the child running into the mother's arms. And there's a similar image here in this poem. But this is a poem again, like Love, about change and about the organic nature of relationships. Relationships are always evolving. And in this poem, Boland, once again, as in the case with Love, uses references to her knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology to explore this fundamentally universal aspect of human nature. In the case of Love, she talked about the story of Aeneas in the Aeneid. Here she talks about Ceres and Persephone. And what's really interesting is she uses the Roman word for the mother in that story, Ceres, and the Greek word for the daughter. Now, the story of Ceres and Persephone was a Greek myth which the Romans adopted. But I think the reason that Boland uses for one of the names, the Greek name, and the other one, the Roman name, is to show that that story spoke to the Greeks and then it spoke to the Romans. And the reason it did is because it's universal and it still speaks to us today. The story of Ceres and Persephone, again, it's explained in the notes. I'll talk about it really briefly here. Ceres was the goddess of the harvest. Persephone was her daughter. Persephone was abducted and brought to the underworld by Hades. Ceres was grief-stricken at the loss of her daughter. Nothing grew. The gods intervened. A deal was struck that her daughter would be returned to her. But as Persephone was leaving the underworld, she reached out and bit into a pomegranate and was cursed that she would return to the underworld for a period each year. Now, this was a myth that, when we think about it today, just was the Greeks' way and the Romans' way of explaining the seasons and the cyclical nature of the seasons. So, the period of the year when Ceres was separated from Persephone, when Persephone had to go back to the underworld, that's winter. And nothing grows in winter because Ceres is devastated by grief at the loss of her daughter. But then spring comes as the time to be reunited with her daughter approaches, and the trees bud and the flowers begin to grow again. Then summertime, they are united and Ceres is happy, so everything grows. And then autumn time, things begin to fade again as the time for separation returns. You don't have to know the myth at all, guys. Don't overcomplicate it. It's in the notes. But just understand, it's a story about motherhood. It's a story about a relationship of a mother to her daughter. And it's a story about change and grief and loss and love. I love the opening. Very typically for Boland, we have a narrative approach. The language is simple, easy to understand, accessible. And there's a tremendously carefully crafted opening. The only legend I have ever loved is the story of a daughter lost in hell. Great line, isn't it? If you didn't know what I just told you, well, I'd like to think you go, oh, I wonder what that legend is. Who's the daughter? How did she end up in hell? The poet is trying to provoke our curiosity. I mean, you're probably going, well, who cares? Why does she love the story? Let's find out. And found and rescued there, love and blackmail are the gist of it. Ceres and Persephone, the names. And the best thing about the legend is I can enter it anywhere and have. Now, by that she means that this story is the story of being a woman, I suppose. Because it's a story of being a girl and seeing the world from the perspective of Persephone. And then it's the story of being a mother and seeing the world from the perspective of Ceres. And Boland is saying, look, I've had experiences like these women in the story. And in the second stanza, she starts giving us some autobiographical detail. She says that she knows that she was linked to those people as a child in exile in a city of fogs and strange continents. Boland's dad was a diplomat. He represented the Irish state. As a child, Boland spent some time in London. And London was a city of fogs. There was terrible air pollution in London until the Clean Air Act of the 1950s. Strange consonants is different accents. So, the idea of being separated from home, she's familiar with that. I read it first, and I was an exiled child in the crackling dusk of the underworld. The stars blighted. Now, this is where things get really interesting. The stars blighted. Later, I walked out in a summer twilight, searching for my daughter at bedtime. There's your link to this moment. And the brilliant line, when she came running, I was ready to make any bargain to keep her. See the connection between the past and the present there? It's so fluid and fluent. Very like love. 1 minute she's a child, next minute she's a mother. I love the image. And this is a motif, a repeated image in Boland's work of stars blighted. So stars offer light in the darkness. When the stars are blighted, it means that the starlight is difficult to perceive because there's clouds. What she's describing there is darkness. And when she says the stars are blighted, she's talking about that time in her childhood as a very difficult and hard time. She felt alone, she felt frightened, she didn't like living in London. But then she immediately switches to a time when it's summer and she's a mother and she feels privileged to have this child, and she says, I would strike any bargain to keep the child. And I suppose what she's referring to there is the idea of change, that in life we have our difficult times and then we have our good times, and then things get difficult again. And it's interesting that she combines the words summer and twilight. I always think it's fascinating the amount of times that Boland refers to the fading of light, to dusk, to twilight in her poetry. And I think it's about her awareness of everything being transient, nothing being permanent. All things must change. And her determination to enjoy and appreciate the moments of blissful happiness because of the awareness of the fact that they're impermanent, they won't last. She says she remembers carrying her child back to the house past white beams, there are flowers. There's images here of suburbia, of the ordinary life where extraordinary things happen. That's depicted, of course, in this moment and in the relationship in love. And wasps and honey-scented bedelias. But I was Ceres then, and I knew, and this, for me, folks, is the best line in the poem, that winter was in store for every leaf on every tree on that road. And I know it's not the case, but I've often asked myself, did George R. Martin read that poem and steal it for his famous line, winter is coming, in the Game of Thrones series of books? But it's a brilliant example of what we call pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy is a technique used by writers wherein they use the weather or the season to convey a mood. The image of winter coming, the image of the leaves being shed by the trees, the image of hardship and suffering. That's such an easy to understand and accessible image. We all get it. We all get that. In the beauty of the summer, we're looking at the leaves. I'm looking at the leaves and the trees outside my window, and soon, in a matter of weeks or months, they will begin to fade. The tree will begin to, drop them because it has to survive the winter. Change is inevitable. And what Boland is saying, and I can relate to this as a parent, what Boland is saying is that when the kid is young and they need you, it's a magical time. It's hard work, don't get me wrong, but it is a magical time. And she was reminding herself to enjoy it because, of course, the child's going to grow up, and one day you're going to put your hand out to your child and say, "Come on, hold my hand across the road," and the child's just going to look at you and go away. because they don't need you anymore. And that's a heartbreaker. She says now, with a third time shift in the poem, it is winter and the stars are hidden. Brilliant. Oh, I love this poem. It is winter. What does she mean? That line could be written in fucking 5th of July in a heat wave. Because when she says it is winter, she means that the relationship with her daughter is now difficult. And when she says the stars are hidden, in London the stars were just blighted. So it was a bit of like, here the stars are hidden, there's no light, she's in despair. Why? Because her daughter is a teenager. And teenagers, often come into conflict with their parents. So this is a poet again who writes poems that are, personal, deeply personal, but utterly universal at the same time, utterly relatable. It is winter and the stars are hidden. And by the way, the whole winter and summer thing ties into the Ceres and Persephone. Very, very clever structure to the poem. I climb the stairs and stand where I can see my child asleep among her teen magazines, very much of its time. Now it'd be with her phone, beside her teen magazines, her can of Coke, her plate of uncut fruit. So there's this really, again, the narrative approach. We're inside their home. The mother walks up the stairs. She looks in the bedroom. The child is lying on bed asleep. She's not a child anymore. She's a teenager. And there's like a can of Coke at the side of the bed and there's a plate of uncut fruit. And when she sees the fruit, and whether there was a plate of fruit, I think we say it's maybe artistic license, who cares? Boland is reminded of the story of the pomegranate. And she says with this kind of gasp of exclamation, the pomegranate, how did I forget it? She could have come home and been safe and ended her story and all our heartbroken searching, but she reached out a hand and picked the pomegranate. Now, you can make this complicated if you want, or you can make it simple, and my choice is simple. What she's saying. The heartbreaking part of being a parent is the knowledge that your child, who you build your life around, from the minute that child is handed to you, like nearly 14 years ago, my oldest child was handed to me in the hospital after he was born. And this tiny little figure who my wife and I had to, do everything for. And we spent the last 14 years minding him. And then last week, off he went to the Gaeltacht, and he was meant to ring us last night, and he didn't bother because he's having too much fun. And we're delighted, but it's hard as well. You worry, you're letting him go. And what Boland is saying here is that's part of the deal. If you're a parent, the deal is, and it's hard to accept, the child is going to grow and the child is going to leave you. And that's difficult. That's why she's reminded of the story of Ceres and Ceres' grief when her child leaves her to go back to the underworld. The next stanza isn't the most interesting stanza in the poem. It's very atmospheric and it captures a really quite melancholy atmosphere. Melancholy means one of sadness. She put her hand out and pulled the French sound for apple and the noise of stone and the proof that even in the place of death, at the heart of legend, in the midst of rocks full of unshed tears, ready to be diamonds by the time the story was told, a child can be hungry. I could warn her. There is still a chance. The rain is cold. The road is flint coloured. The suburb has cars and cable television. The veiled stars are above ground. The stanza, it's tough. The references to, the stories from Greek mythologies, the rocks full of unshed tears and so on, the pomegranate, Persephone or Persephone eating the pomegranate. But what she's essentially doing is taking the story from the myth and showing how the story reflects all of our lives. The myths are powerful because they are about the universal human experience. And the poet, even though she is aware of all that, is struggling at this time because her daughter is growing up. And as she grows up, she's leaving her. And that's why she refers to the rain being cold. Again, a great example of pathetic fallacy. And that's why she refers to, for the third time in the poem, stars, hope, being veiled. Earlier on they were blighted, then they were hidden. We had this idea of her suffering communicated through that image of blighted stars, veiled stars. The last part of the poem has one of the great lines. It is another world, but what else can a mother give her daughter but such beautiful rifts in time? And then the line, if I defer the grief, I have to get it right because if you're a parent, you'll relate to this. If I defer the grief, I will diminish the gift. The legend will be hers as well as mine. And what she means there, it's a great example again of juxtaposition, grief and gift. What she means there is, if I try to hold my child back, if I selfishly try to prevent my child from doing what is natural and has always been natural, growing up and going out into that dangerous world, even though my instinct, every fibre in my nerves, what tells me not to let them out there because the world is a dangerous place. If I try to stop them doing that, her doing that, I'm going to damage our relationship. And that's the gift. The gift is the unreserved love that a parent has for her child. And that's the source of the grief. You love your child. Every instinct in you tells you to mind them and protect them from the dangerous world out there. But you have to let them go. You have to let them go when the time comes. Very, very intelligent poem.